Hello. Welcome to the Weather's Cool podcast, where we dive into the world of meteorology, but with a twist. This isn't just about weather forecasts and storm tracking. We're here to hear the stories behind the meteorologists themselves. You'll get to know the people who bring you the weather every day, what drives them, what challenges they've faced, and how their personal journeys shape the work they do. If you're passionate about weather or curious about the lives of those who predict it, you're in the right place. So jump in as we explore the people behind the forecasts and discover what makes meteorologists truly unique. Welcome to Weather's Cool, and this is the Weather's Cool podcast project.
Hey, it's Justin Kiefer with the podcast project, the Weather School Podcast Project. And as you know, with these podcasts, we are talking to broadcast meteorologists from all over the country and to find out their stories and their passions and what they are doing as meteorologists and kind of just find the backstory. And so today, I'm joined by an old coworker and a good friend. This is Chief Meteorologist Ken Weathers from WATE in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so Ken is a longtime broadcast meteorologist, and we're going to find out a little bit about his story. But Ken, first off, thanks for joining us on the podcast project.
Justin, pleasure to be here as always, and good to see you again.
It is. It's been a few years. I appreciate that. We're going to sort of hopscotch around. It won't be chronological. What I'd love to do first off is just find out about you right now. What's going on with your work and where you work and your community there in East Tennessee, and find out just about, what's going on when Ken Weathers, and Weathers is his last name, by the way.
Yeah, it is. My dad was a dentist, and my granddad kind of was in charge of a dime store, if you're old enough to remember what those are. But yeah, we think actually, backstory, we think it came, English is our heritage, and we think it came from withers, which is the back of an animal's neck. So obviously when you come over on Ellis Island and they ask for your name and you said Withers, they probably wrote it phonetically as Weathers, and there you go.
Wow, that's an interesting story there. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense for sure.
But I guess my relatives, ancestors were not dealing with cloud formations back then.
So tell us about Ken Weathers in Knoxville. What's going on in your life right now?
Well, been in Knoxville a couple of stints. I've been here. I started here back in the early 90s and then left after about 5 years and came back, but have been back since '05. So total, I think I've been here about 25, 26 years, and working towards my 33rd year in broadcast meteorology. I started when I was 5, so that obviously, no, that's so hard to believe. But love Knoxville. My wife is from the area, so we love it. Our son goes to the University of Tennessee now, so I'm like the only one in the family now that does not have a degree from UT. So maybe I need to take some classes over there. But yeah, I mean, we love the area, as you know. It's got everything, every climate as you can imagine, and some challenges with the terrain that we do have here in East Tennessee.
It's an interesting point. I know that when I began working there in the early part of 2019. And we worked together and along with another fellow meteorologist who had been there for quite some time. And that the terrain challenges was something that I hadn't had to work with, except for briefly in Connecticut, to where you go from a river valley to a mountain peak that's 6,000 feet to a plateau peak that's up, more than 3,000 feet. That, those challenges are kind of interesting. Talk a little bit, and we'll sort of circle back to when you first got to Knoxville, but on a day-to-day meteorological weather forecasting challenge, especially when the weather's changing, how does that, I know it's the back of your hand now, but how does that evolve as a forecaster in East Tennessee?
You have to be ready to make mistakes and get the forecast wrong and then learn from it. And I don't like to be wrong. If my wife was listening, she'd say, yes, he does not like to be wrong. So anytime that I miss a forecast, I want to know why. So I'll go back and look and kind of put that into the back of my mind so that the next time maybe a similar pattern comes along, I'll be like, yeah, I remember that last time. Now, as we say, they're not always going to be the same no matter what, but there are usually some similarities with things. And as you know, here, it's hard to get snow in Knoxville. you have to have a particular track for the storm system. And after the storm has moved away from us and you get the northwest flow behind it, Knoxville won't get snow out of that, but the surrounding areas will because of the terrain you mentioned. So that can be challenging. With a valley that we live in, trying to get rid of cloud cover, fog, sometimes that can be hard to forecast. And then air quality in the summertime can be bad because, again, we get everything trapped down in here. But it's never boring. There is nothing boring in weather, period, but in a market like this, or maybe in a Denver, something like that, or even lake effect snows. There are areas that are, Phoenix may be a little boring a lot of times, but there are times when they get rain or snow in some of the higher elevations that it's busy there. So I think that's just the best thing with me is I don't like repetition a lot. So having different weather every day keeps you engaged. It keeps it interesting. It keeps you busy. So I like that part.
That's sort of great sort of career advice for any new meteorologist, is to find a dynamic weather market. Don't get into a market where the weather doesn't change from day to day or weeks upon end, because as it challenges as a meteorologist and as a forecaster, that can only be good as you move forward in a career. The one thing I recall that surprised me a little bit was, and you were so apt to point out on regular occurrence, to be ready for this, that in the summertime especially, this downsloping sort of heat burst that would follow the air coming off the mountains to the east down into the valley. And the temperatures would just remarkably get hot in some cases at the airport where the recording station is. And just a really interesting local effect, but so profound, and what the lasting impacts day to day were in those for those residents.
Yeah, well, the terrain here, we do, as you mentioned, we have mountain peaks, the Smokies, we have a valley, we have a plateau, but it runs from northeast to southwest. So it's not due north-south, it's actually slanted. And when you get these south to southeast winds, sometimes even southwest, they come up and over the Smokies and then they descend. In the airport, if you've ever flown into McGee-Tyson Airport, you can see the mountains. They're literally right there. So when the air comes over those mountains, it descends, and it's called compressional warming. I always explain it at schools. It's like if you've ever pumped up a bicycle tire, right? You're taking air through a cylinder, you're forcing it down, but you're pushing it into a smaller area, that last little tube before it connects to the tire to inflate it. So you're pumping, you're forcing those air molecules into a smaller spot. And once you're done, if you feel that tube, it's really hot because you force that air into a smaller area. And the same thing happens when those winds come up and over the mountains and they descend. You're pushing it down into a smaller area. And yeah, like you mentioned, you have a light wind out of the northeast all morning and you're in the 40s. And then all of a sudden, 10, 11 a.m., whatever, whenever the winds switch, you can jump 10, 20 degrees in just a couple of hours. And it can make for a headache trying to forecast.
East Tennessee's version of the Chinook wind, I guess.
Exactly. Very good explanation there.
So Knoxville's been your home now for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And you said you had 2 stints there, but let's kind of go back to young Ken. Let's talk about a childhood. Where did you grow up? How were things as a kid, and what got you interested in weather?
I was born and raised in Metro Atlanta. So heat was usually what we dealt with there in the summertime. Heat and humidity and very little winter weather. But what kind of really got me started was I was a junior in high school, and we actually had thunder sleet here, and it was quite a bit. Not here in Knoxville, here in Atlanta. We had thunder sleet, and I want to say we probably got a couple of inches of accumulation of thunder sleet. And to me, I didn't understand it. I mean, why is ice falling from the sky and you're seeing thunder and lightning? So went to this thing called a library. The young kids may not know what that is, but it has books in it. And so did some research to try to figure out exactly why that happened. And figured out, wow, this is really interesting, fascinating. And ironically, my mom was a school teacher. And she taught at an elementary school where across the street there was a science center. If you've ever been to Atlanta, if you've never been, I'd highly suggest going. It's called Fernbank Science Center. And they actually had a meteorologist on staff there. They had a planetarium. They had a place with a telescope. They would even sometimes release weather balloons to collect data. And so I got to talking to this guy and finagled my way into basically getting a class. He would teach me basically intro to meteorology my senior year in high school. So at the end of my high school day, once I was done, I would go there in the afternoon and, for a couple of hours, we would do meteorology 101. And pretty much after that point, that's what sealed the deal. And I decided that's what I'm going to do. So
What a great opportunity, because
very fortunate.
knowing that the synchronicity there, you've got the interest and the passion, but then right in your neighborhood is a place where you can learn as a high schooler. That's really unique. Obviously, not for everyone in the country, but I would highly encourage any sort of high school student to kind of seek out and search out if meteorology is their passion, to find something like that. That's pretty cool.
It was. And then the downside was when I knew, hey, that's what I wanted to do, I was going to go to college for. At the time, there was nowhere in the state of Georgia that offered that. Georgia Tech had a master's program, heavily math-based, which meteorology is, but theirs, I'm assuming, was a lot more so. But nowhere in the state offered it. So I had to go out of state. So I went applied to a place called Florida State University. I don't know who would want to go there, Justin Kiefer. No, but I was accepted there. I was shocked. I was accepted to Florida State and also to the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And I chose UNC Asheville just because of the size. I liked a smaller place, fewer students. At the time, a general class, they had a restriction of less than 30 students per class. So if you were taking a English class or whatever, you wouldn't have more than 30 people in there. So, and at the time, the atmospheric science department, I want to say it was only in its third year in existence. So they had recently started it. So there were only 3 professors as well. So I kind of liked that. I liked the one-on-one ability where if you had questions, you could ask them. You didn't feel intimidated. And I think my graduating class, my atmospheric graduating class, we were the biggest at the time. Of course, there was, the third year. I think we had like probably 15 people that graduated. So yeah, I liked that part of it. But there are times I'm saying, hey, I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone to Florida State. It is a great school. I was joking. It is a fantastic school. It really is.
Yeah, I grew up in Middle Georgia, and I recently spoke with a meteorologist who works in Panama City, Florida, Chris Smith, who grew up in the Atlanta area. And we chose the Florida State route because, again, there was nowhere in Georgia for undergraduate atmospheric science. So we would have welcomed you as a Seminole, but I'm glad you went to UNC Asheville.
Well, one thing that's interesting, Tennessee, I think they're getting close to having a full somewhere on the west side of the state. But as of like a couple of years ago, they didn't. But they did a nice thing where they did tuition work it out in the fact. So like University of Alabama, Huntsville, Virginia Tech, and Western Kentucky, if you wanted to attend those, if you were a Tennessee resident, they would give you in-state tuition. So that was very helpful. As parents, we know that, kids in school, any way you can try to save money, that's a good thing. So if somebody happens to be watching this here in Tennessee or some other states, I would look into that. I would ask if there are any type of those agreements between out-of-state schools.
That's a great thing that they can partner up like that. I'd love to see in Tennessee to create a program, but I guess from the ground up these days, that may not be the easy thing to do.
Yeah, I want to say it may be UT Martin that's working on it because, they do the space program there. So maybe that's part of it. But I imagine it's kind of difficult to start something from scratch. Now, I will say the University of Tennessee here in Knoxville, I think they just started a minor in broadcast meteorology, which is kind of interesting because they do have a big journalism school here.
Yes.
But I would imagine through the earth sciences, they're probably working with that, but I don't know a whole lot about it.
So UNC, when you got to college and you're finishing up with your undergraduate, was television where you were going to head, or did you want to do research, or how did that work out?
I really thought that I was going to go on to grad school. There was a department at Texas Tech University where they do basically, I'll go back one step. I always wanted to be an architect when I was growing up as a kid. Georgia Tech is in your backyard, right? You want to be an architect. but I wasn't the best math student, I'll be honest. And I said, well, maybe it's not the best. And also, I can't draw a straight line with a ruler, so that's probably not a good thing. But as we know, I ended up taking more math and meteorology than I would have in architecture. But this leads me to the point. Texas Tech offered a master's degree where they would work meteorology slash architecture. They wanted to see how to improve buildings to withstand severe weather. So, they've got the air cannon that launches the 2x4s into the bricks or into siding, that kind of thing. And that kind of spurred my interest. Like, oh, yeah, that would be right up my alley. I'd get the best of both worlds, right? But I had to get a kind of like an internship or a practicum that was part of our degree you had to do to graduate. And in the Asheville market, it's kind of a strange TV market. There's Asheville, Greenville, and Spartanburg, South Carolina. So it's a triad market. So there was only one station in Asheville, and the person there at the time was not a meteorologist. So they were kind of intimidated by having interns there, so we couldn't do it. So I actually had to drive to the Tri-Cities, up into Johnson City. And this was before the interstate was built. They were actually building it at the time, which was crazy. So it would take a while, probably an hour and a half or 2 hours almost to get there. And I'd go a couple of times a week. And Mark Reynolds, who is still there, talk to Mark often to get advice just because he's done this so long and has a wealth of knowledge. He said, hey, I heard that there could be an opening in Knoxville. Do you want to apply? And I was like, okay. And, sent one resume, one tape, and got a job and figured that's how easy it is, right?
Yeah.
It's not that easy, but it worked out. I really had no idea what I was doing. As you know, back then, the computer systems were nothing like they are now. Dial-up internet at best. So it was challenging, but I learned quickly that I also enjoyed the graphics part of it. I enjoy making graphics. I enjoy that part of it, working with the computer. So that part was fun for me.
And it's sort of interesting as you say that, and many who I've spoken to on the podcast project, is how sort of that introduction to television started without really like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I can't wait to be a TV broadcaster. But the combination of the meteorological skills and the graphic design and the ability to sort of be creative in that, I think it really attracted the people that I've spoken to where this is fun. I can do this. I can create graphics. I can tell my weather story, if you will. Early on, I mean, not many folks come right out of college and go directly to a market the size of Knoxville. So that's obviously a testament to your skill and your ability right off the bat.
Well, thank you, but I think a lot of luck was involved in that, at least as well. But we stayed here for about 5.5 years. I was doing weekends at the time. We didn't have weekend mornings back then. It was just weekend evenings. And we had an opening for a morning slot here at the station that I was not chosen for. So I was kind of tired of working weekends, so wanted to explore my options and ended up getting a job in Oklahoma City at the ABC affiliate there doing weekday mornings. So we ended up going out there for about 3 years. And I always joke around saying, I think I got my master's degree in severe weather out there in 3 years just for being out there, because it was a fantastic learning opportunity. And you talk about never a dull moment. There is never a dull moment out there.
And you were, I recall, you were working in Oklahoma City when they had some fairly violent tornadoes then.
Yeah, the May 3rd, 99 event was definitely the peak there for sure. What was interesting is, again, I was doing morning. So I worked that morning and I was there probably till mid-afternoon, and they told me, you have to go home to go to sleep because you've got to come back tonight. So I think I ended up going back sometime around midnight or shortly thereafter. And a thing that a lot of people don't remember is the dry line kind of reset, and we had additional tornado warnings that morning. And so one of the warnings was actually pretty close to where, search and rescue were out looking for people. And it's like, oh my gosh, how do you convey that? You need to get out of there to try to get somewhere safe in case this, does develop. So I think overall it was want to say it was around 70 something tornadoes, maybe 77 in the 24 hours. It was unbelievable.
Oh my goodness.
It was unbelievable.
And you think about that challenge because you're in a broadcast media at the time where social media was not available.
No,
And
no.
but you're trying to inform your viewers or just the public in general in a place where perhaps power has been knocked out, and you've got people in the field who are doing search and rescue. I'm, and knowing that from your perspective, not you specifically, but someone in your position, there's a little bit of a helpless feeling because they can't hear this message,
Right.
and they may not know this thing's coming.
You're exactly right. So you're almost hoping that somebody is watching that has a two-way radio type, even back then, cell phones, again, we're dating ourselves, they were baggy phones, the ones you wear around.
That's right.
Go look it up, kids. Or the Zach Morris brick phone, the big thing. And they weren't common. So it was more difficult to get in touch with people, at least initially out there. But yeah, that was definitely one of the craziest events, I'd say, that I experienced out there.
And so so you're in Oklahoma City, you said, for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Did you come back to Knoxville from there, or was there another stop?
Not directly, no. We wanted to come back to this side of the country. So kind of did a little bit of work, helping some other stations, briefly did some work in Winston-Salem, in Raleigh. Also actually helped a couple of stations here in Knoxville at the time, but then ended up at the Weather Channel in Atlanta, and I actually worked with the radio department at the Weather Channel. A lot of people don't realize that they had that, but we had, I don't know, probably 20 something meteorologists on staff, and we did, severe weather and everyday weather coverage all across the country. And even then, it was a new thing called Sirius and XM radio. They were separate. So we would do forecasts for them as well continuously. And I was fortunate. I got to work on some of the biggest radio stations across the country, from KNX in Los Angeles to WABC and WCBS in New York, Detroit, WJR. So not only do you have that experience, but again, you're learning how to forecast for those areas, and it's a challenge. That's why I mentioned Denver earlier. We had a Denver station we had to forecast for. We had some small markets like Watertown, New York, which, lake effect snow there, Jamestown, New York as well, to Miami. So, and New Orleans, we did WWL. So Katrina, I was there for Katrina at the Weather Channel when that came through. So that in itself, learning how to forecast for different parts of the country, I think helped me a lot.
Wow. You think about, Jamestown, everybody says International Falls is the icebox of the country, but Jamestown might be a colder spot when it comes to wintertime temperatures.
They were extremely cold there. And yes, as you know, any direction of the wind change can affect lake effect snow bands that set up across the area. So those are the kind of things you had to think about. What direction is the wind going to be coming out of that day, that kind of thing. And I think one of the funnest things that I did while I was there with Sirius and XM, starting on one of them, I can't remember, it may have been XM, they did Major League Baseball. So when the World Series would come around, they would want, hey, a forecast for the World Series. And at the time, I can't remember the year, but if you're a baseball enthusiast, you'll remember it was when the Astros were in, and they were at Minute Maid Park, and they would need to know if they could open the roof, basically, at the juice box, as they called it. But I didn't want to just. My philosophy's always been, I don't want to just tell you need an umbrella. I want to tell you why you need an umbrella.
Excellent.
So the first time I was on with them, they were expecting, hey, partly cloudy, 75 degrees, no problems. Justin, hey, temperatures are going to be this, humidity levels are going to be this, which means the ball's going to travel farther. The winds are actually blowing out to right field. This is going to benefit the Astros because they have more left-handed hitters. And by the time I was done, the people were like, all right, we want him next time. Just things like that were fun and enjoyable. And I guess if it goes back maybe to my mom being a teacher, I kind of want to teach people about the weather, get them excited about it, not just, hey, it's raining today, but I want to tell you why. So
That's an awesome point. And it's really interesting how you said you've had all these different markets that you had to dig into the meteorology in order to come up with a forecast. And it wasn't just the place that you were living.
right.
So that I can understand and now hear that really helps you as a forecaster be ready for anything that might come your way.
And when there was severe weather in those markets, you would focus on them. And then some of the other meteorologists would have to take up your daily work, because back then, especially before you were streaming to your phone, radio was how people were staying safe if your power went out or if you were in your safe spot. So they concentrated heavily on severe weather coverage in those bigger markets. And I think it also helped me as a TV broadcaster, because in radio, you have to be a lot more specific about what you're describing. They're not watching, they're listening. And if you can make that connection to describe it well enough that they can see a picture, then I feel like you've done your job. But when I missed the broadcasting part of it, making the graphics, that kind of stuff. So when I went back, I felt like it helped me by doing that radio to be a lot more descriptive, because as you know, it's also different in TV, mornings versus evenings. Mornings, you're more listening because you're getting the kids ready, you're making breakfast, you're getting dressed. Whereas in the evenings, you're watching. So I always would try to tell people that's when you need to be more descriptive. And I would always say, hey, it's okay. Stop what you're doing. Put down the breakfast for 1 second and come look at the TV, because I have to point something out to you.
Yep.
And, the younger people are like, oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. So that also helped by doing radio, I think.
Yeah. When I was in college and then in my first job, I also did radio. Actually, the first thing I got paid for was doing radio forecasts for some radio network in Alabama. And we were in Tallahassee, Florida. And there was also a radio network in Florida. And so, like you said, you've got to be able to paint a picture with your words. And you can't just say, as you can see, because that doesn't work.
Because you can't.
On radio. And so that really helped me in my sort of formative parts as far as that descriptive nature, like you said, and then bring that into the TV part to paint the picture, because everybody's not looking up and watching, like you said. And so that's an interest. And I'm glad you said that, because it reminded me of those days when I was a student meteorologist working for a little company and doing the Alabama radio network. And we provided forecasts for these TV stations that were on that radio network. So that brings you back now from the Weather Channel back to Knoxville.
Yeah.
How did that work? How did that unfold for you?
Again, they had an opening, went back to doing weekend evenings at the time, but we love the Knoxville area, and anybody that's lived in Atlanta knows traffic is no fun. Even if you live close to where you work, it's a long commute and can be a headache. So, we loved the area. So when the opportunity came to come back, that was kind of a no-brainer for us. So that would have been in, I guess, late 04, early 05 that we came back, and have kind of been back ever since.
There you go.
Yeah.
So the career at this point is sort of typical. You're moving around, you're taking a job here, you're taking a job there, you're kind of feeling what's good, what works, and then you, like you said, that tug to get back closer to that area where you started, and you're familiar with pulls, and you're there. And so now it's 20 years on, and the roots are deep now. And like you said, your son's going to college there. Because at this point now you start building into the fabric of the community. How do you feel that fits into your job, or maybe just your persona in regard to how you work, and then also how you work in your community?
Yeah. Grow where you're planted, as they say. But again, it kind of goes back, like we said, I enjoy teaching people about weather. So, school visits are a great thing. I love doing that, going out and kind of educating kids and help developing the next, young group of scientists. It doesn't have to be weather. It can just be science in general. But making inroads with the communities as well, and connections to earn their trust. Because again, 80% of the time, the weather is not going to have a huge impact on their day. I mean, it will, but I mean in the sense that it's not going to be life threatening. But when you have the opportunity of a severe weather event, the flooding from Helene we had just a little while ago, a couple of months ago, to the fires of 2016 in the Smokies, that's where you hope that you've earned their trust, if you will. Because at that point, I always say, I don't care where you get your severe weather information from, as long as you're getting it from somewhere, because our ultimate goal is to make sure people are safe. To me, that's why I feel like I do this job. The education part is great, the helping people, but making sure people are safe. I think that's the biggest part of why I do what I do.
Great point. Let's talk a little bit about the fires in 2016, because I began working there a few years after that, but it was still fresh as a sort of a moment etched in time for East Tennessee. Walk us through a little bit about how that unfurled, because it's not necessarily a weather story, but weather played a huge part of that.
Yeah.
But you all jumped in, as I recall, the entire weather community, meteorology department, the news department, to become this voice for those people. Walk us through maybe the days leading up to that, and then what happened. It was in November, right, of 16?
It was. We'll start with late summer going into fall. We started to get really dry. October's our driest month anyway, but it was extremely dry September leading to October. I'll digress just a bit. If we hadn't had the Helene rain, we could have been in a very similar situation. It was extremely dry in September. The only way we ended, I think we ended up with the 12th driest September, instead of one of if not the driest, just from the rain the last couple of days of September. In October, we ended up, I think it was overall the 4th driest on record. We would have been the driest, but we had one shower move over the airport like a couple of days before October ended. But in 2016, we were leading up to that. It was an extremely dry fall. By then in November, obviously, you've already had your foliage fall. So there are leaves on the ground. It was started by a couple of kids, and it was small at first, obviously. They thought maybe they could contain it. It was within the park boundaries, but then we had a meteorological event. As you know, it's called a mountain wave event. Again, it has very much to do with wind directions, but what happens is the way the terrain is, think of it as well like if you have a garden hose and you turn it on, water's coming out, right? But if you restrict the flow by putting your thumb over it, you accelerate that water coming out, even though it's the same amount of water, but you're just making it excel quicker because you're restricting the size of it. Same thing kind of happens there in the Smokies. So we had the mountain wave event that spread the fires like crazy. There was no way to contain it. When you're getting 60, 70, 80 mile per hour winds, you have very dry conditions, you have leaf drop, and now you're spreading fire. It was amazing, scary to see, and just how quickly it happened. And then you have the issue where communications went out. Power lines were getting burned down, power poles. So there was hard to relay the information that people needed to evacuate. So that's where they really started to rely on us. I remember the National Weather Service actually put out a warning to tell people to evacuate so that we would see it, and so that we would, broadcast that to the people that were hopefully able to watch TV or get information. And if you've ever been to the Smokies as well, if you get into some spots, the cell service is not great.
I mean, and people live there and they vacation there because it's remote, and they're checking out and they want to get away. And it kind of puts them in a position if something like that. I mean, again, it's a rarity, it's a rare event, but to kind of do a reset on that. So as we talked about earlier, East Tennessee has this plateau that comes off from Middle Tennessee down to the valley of the Tennessee River and several other rivers. So there's a lower spot. Mm-hmm. And then you start going up toward the Smokies and the southern sections of the Appalachians to where you're up in 5,000 and 6,000 foot. So these resort towns of Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg and Townsend and some other areas that are up in the mountains that people love to go visit, but they are remote. It's not easy to get in or out of. And as I recall, seeing the video that you have as the fire was sort of cascading down the side of this mountain toward these cities, there's one way in and one way out. So
That's the key. You're exactly right. The roads are very restrictive. They're very curvy as well. So there were reports of people, hey, I'm okay, I'm okay. And you turn a corner and there's nowhere to go. So you're having to go backtrack and try to find ways to get through. So it was amazing. I mean, a lot was learned from that, obviously. They have implemented now a reverse 911 type feature where they can actually call out to your cell phone or your home phone, your landline, and a recording comes on. I still get them, which is kind of ironic and strange at the same time. But that's a way to disseminate information. They have a better communications now, a two-way radio communications between emergency management and city officials. So they have a much better handle on, if hopefully never happens again, but they prepare for that.
Is that video still something that can be accessed off of your website, the station's website?
If not anywhere on YouTube, as you know, you could probably find it. But yeah, you could probably find at least something on there. But the destruction was just amazing. And we'll preface it by saying a couple of days later, we finally did get some rain. A cold front came through and it really helped with it. And we were kind of wrapping up the coverage. And there was also a severe threat that night after the fires, 36 hours later. And it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and, people are tired, ready to go home. And I was watching one cell in our southern counties between us and Chattanooga, and it was showing some signs of rotation. And I said, we got to go back on the air. And about the time we went on the air, they issued a warning for it. It ended up being an EF2 tornado down in McMinn County, and it did some damage to some homes. And so, I mean, it was insult to injury. You go from dry fires to within 36 hours, you have an EF2 tornado, and this is in November. So never dull, never dull.
For you being a source of information, but then the aftermath and being kind of a voice of compassion, as I recall, and talking to the people who are still, some of them still working there, and how you told that story, really important part of the television communication business is not necessarily, obviously warning people and preparing them and getting them safe and protecting their lives and their property, but also making sure that their stories aren't forgotten. And I think that y'all did a great job at that in the subsequent years when the anniversary date would come up, and then just always connecting with those communities. I've always admired that about the work that you do, as well as your.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. But it goes also back to the point, now you're part of this community. This is your home. These people are your neighbors. They are your friends. And there are still people that are still dealing with the aftermath of Helene. I mean, the impacts from that, they're still going on in some spots. So we didn't see nearly the impacts, of course, they did in Western North Carolina, but the rivers that feed into East Tennessee come from Western North Carolina. So we definitely saw the flooding issues from all the rain on the other side of the Smokies that came our way. We had some very tense moments with potential dam breaks, 2 different ones. They were breached. There was flooding that was 10 to 12 feet higher than it's ever been, even higher than the record flood stage. How do you equate that to people? I mean, how do you try to explain that? It's like the people with hurricanes. I've been through them before. I'll be fine. Well, this is different. I mean, last time it came up to your doorstep. This time it's coming up to your roof. I mean, it's hard to explain that sometimes.
Yeah, and then you feel, or at least in my case, and likely with you as well, and most of the people that I speak to in this capacity, you think you've told everything you can possibly tell, and then you just hope that it landed, that you heard it and took it to heart.
And that's the hardest thing, is hoping that people have listened. Hopefully you've made your point. And there are times, there's uncertainty in weather, and there's a chance we could see severe storms. And then there's, April 27th, 2011, we're going to see storms, those kind of things. And you have to be able to, again, hopefully with trust over time with your viewers and your community, that they know the tone that you have. They know the stress you're feeling, but trying to stay calm and get your message across.
Yeah, I remember speaking with Danielle Breezy, who is a Nashville meteorologist, talking about the tornado that hit Nashville in 2020.
Right.
And when she broadcast on the air that evening, late that evening, and she had to change the tenor of her voice, and people have subsequently said when you got to a point where your demeanor was different, it's like then we knew that things were different with this. And because East Tennessee has a lot of active weather, especially in the spring and fall severe weather seasons. Was April 2011? I mean, that was going to unfold. It was highly forecasted, but was that the worst for East Tennessee, as you recall?
I would say that, and I wasn't around for the Xenia, Ohio outbreak in the 70s, but those two definitely were the most, I would say, warnings in a 24-hour period. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So as and you've had recent ones for East Tennessee as well. Was it this past spring where you had several tornadoes to track?
Yes, it seems like, but it's not as the things that I've noticed. It's not the typical March to May anymore. It's we've had them in August. We've had them in July now, Justin. July and August. I think last year was our first August tornado that we had on record. So, November, October. I don't knock on wood, we've not had a December one yet that I can remember, but it just as volatile as things get and have gotten, you always have to be ready.
Talk just for a second then about the shift of Tornado Alley. I mean, how do you feel about? I mean, obviously you're in it every single year, and the more you forecast and the more you're in a position, I think it's not just kind of a talking point. I think there's evidence to back that up.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, especially, you mentioned Danielle from Middle Tennessee back toward the Mississippi River and down into Mississippi and Alabama as well. That really has been the hot spot recently. And I think on average, East Tennessee, we get about a dozen a year, I'd say. But that's probably even on the high side. I'd probably say less than that, maybe half a dozen. But it does seem like we have had more recently, and they come in waves. In an event, it's usually not just one. You'll have a couple of supercells or a couple of quick spin up type storms. We could talk another long time about radar gaps as well on a podcast if you want to. But again, it can be challenging on our plateau counties with the distance between the Nashville and the East Tennessee radar.
Yeah, for West Virginia, where I currently live, very infrequent tornadoes, but this year is the most ever that they've had reported and confirmed. Some of the confirmation, I think, is due to people being able to cell phone video in rural areas that would never have been able to do that in the past. But also there's a little bit higher frequency through the Ohio Valley. Obviously, Ohio gets tremendous amounts of severe weather, but there's a gap with the Ohio River and the mountains here in West Virginia that disrupts a little bit of that flow. But this year has been quite active, even all the way up into Pittsburgh. Numerous tornadoes. We have a radar gap as well here, so we can talk about that.
Well, let me ask one question about you. You just brought it up. Do you think we are seeing more tornadoes, or are we documenting more tornadoes? Because I get that question often, and I kind of go back and forth. I think it's maybe a little bit of both.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, I think it's both. I think there are more frequent in this area. I think the Dixie Alley is becoming Tornado Alley. The Midwest is still going to have their supercell dry line, outbreaks. So I think will never go away. But I just think the frequency in the Deep South, for various reasons, I think there's more moisture in the air. There's lots of things going on that are creating some of these tornadic cells. But there's also more people to see them and report them and document. So I think it's a little bit of both. I equate it to the satellite coverage for the tropical Atlantic. Prior to having satellite coverage, you had to rely on ship traffic to get hurricane reports. And then before that, it was, sailing ships. So we don't really know the true frequency since, satellite coverage of the tropical Atlantic. So, is the tornado frequency a combination of there's more people living,
Yes.
more people with cell phones to take pictures, or is there more tornado? I agree with you. I think it's a combination.
But I'd pick your brain on that one.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to watch. All these years later, it's like there's always, like you said, there's always something interesting, always something new, and always something to learn about the atmospheric science and the processes that happen. Tornadoes, the Xenia, Ohio tornado outbreak, along with Hurricane Camille, those were the ones in my formative years that said, "This is really interesting. I'm going to study this."
It usually is an event. It's an event or an occurrence that most meteorologists will say that's what started it for me.
My brother and I we'd watch these storms form. We were living in middle Delaware, and these storms would form out to our west, and they were just massive cloud, just filling the sky. And we would just sit in the backyard, probably dangerously so, and just watch these storms roll in because we just were fascinated by it. Had our own little weather station that we could record and report the weather. It wasn't like a Davis instrument out there that sent it back to the house. We had to go out and look at the thermometer and had a minimum and maximum thermometer. We'd document it. We did it for a season, and then things changed. But
yes, but it was still fun to do.
It was still fun. So now we're in the mid 2020s. Technology has changed. It's constantly getting better, and our equipment's getting better. What do you have on a day-to-day basis besides your passion for what you do to keep you engaged and activated, in your job?
I think it's definitely, like we said, that the different weather is different every day. And I still have that drive that I want to be right. I want to make sure that the forecast that I give, whether it's sunny or whether it's stormy, is going to be right, because so many people want to plan their day, and I just want them to be prepared. So that's still what keeps me going every day.
I've always sort of fallen back on a adage that a professor passed along a long time ago. There's a difference between accuracy and precision. You can be accurate but not be precise. But when you're precise and accurate, then your forecast, if you will, because you can say high in the 80s and that's accurate. But if you say a high of 88 and it hits 88, then you're precise.
Good point.
And so, I think too many people just want to be broadly accurate. But I always admired the fact that you were challenged to get that forecast, especially for the temperatures, as precise as possible, because it meant something.
You can say it's stubborn. You can say it.
I know that your station was a participant in that weather rate.
Mm-hmm.
And so the accuracy amongst the local TV stations and across the country was always one of the best. And I don't know, I apologize for not knowing this. Do you still participate in that? And are you still number one?
Yeah, well, this will be eighth year in a row. So yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what's on your sort of meteorological horizon, your broadcast horizon? Obviously, you've got a long career behind you, but a lot of years ahead of you. What do you think's going on for Ken?
You always hope there's a lot of years ahead of you, but I don't know. I really don't know, Justin. The way the landscape of broadcasting is changing daily, I'd say very few people have the time to sit down every night at 6 p.m. and watch the news. You need to be able to reach them where they are, and that's going to be this thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's where you have to be able to reach them. So if you're doing that on a daily basis, then when bad weather happens, you've maybe built that trust with them that they would turn in rather to your local station when that happens. So, I mean, there are still people obviously that watch the newscast every day. I'm just saying it's a lot harder for them to have appointment time viewing. They may catch a snippet of it, but then you got to run to ballet practice. You've got to go to church. You've got to go do other outside activities. So that's been, I'd say, the challenge that a lot of the bigger TV ownership groups have struggled to realize, where you see it more on a local impact.
And it's hard to quantify, when you push something out to a digital platform, whether it's a phone or a tablet or a computer or it's on social media. I mean, you can see impressions and you can get if it's engaged, but you don't know if someone's just scrolling on by, and if you're trying to put a message out, or if you send something directly to a phone with a weather alert, hopefully it hits and it lands. And so it's hard to quantify if that actually happened.
And I think that is our challenge over the next 5 years, decade, however long, we're doing this, that how do we keep people informed and safe? What is going to be the best way? What is the next best way? Always looking ahead at what is next instead of trying to play catch up to what is now.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, yeah. Staying a step ahead of the curve is always a good thing. So I ask this of my podcast guests, and to give you a moment. So let's take Ken today, and you go back and mentor Ken in college. What advice? What would you kind of tell young Ken going into, your career's been great. You've done the things that you wanted to do. How would you sort of advise young Ken?
Find the right work-life balance. And that's going to be true in any job. I mean, I'm a driven person. I like to make the best forecast. I like to keep people informed, but you also have to remember that a job is what you do. It's not who you are. And if you can realize that sooner rather than later, you're going to be fine.
Pretty sage advice.
It's the gray we have, right?
Ken, our time together today is short. Our time together when we worked in Knoxville also seemed like it went by in a minute. We worked together for 4 years at WATE in Knoxville, but I appreciate your as a coworker and as a friend, and also that you're willing to come on and participate in the podcast project. So I just wanted to thank you for joining us today, really.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate the opportunity.
We'll make sure all of your contact information is posted up when I publish this podcast, but your time is precious and I appreciate it today.
Thanks, Justin.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Weather School Podcast Project. To see all the episodes of the podcast project, please visit school.com/weatherschool/about. Become a member and join the Weather School community.